Hello everyone, and welcome to today's Arcserve webinar looking at the Arcserve Udp Console. This is the second of a three-part webinar series on the Arcserve Udp basics. My name is Armin Jihanian. I'm the pre-sales consultant for Arcserve, and I'll be presenting today's session. Before we get started, if anyone has any questions throughout today's session, please feel free to use the questions or the chat panel to type your questions in. And at the end of the session, we'll go through any questions that may have come up. During today's session, we'll take another very quick product overview of the Arcserve UDP solution. We'll recap some of the agent features that we looked at in the last session, and then we'll take a look at the features that are available within the Arcserve UDP console itself. We'll look at how to manage nodes. So we'll look at how we can add nodes, we'll look at what a node is, and we can see how we can deploy agents and so on. We'll take a look at how we can perform agentless VM backups. We'll take a look at the virtual standby feature. Virtual standby lets you take a recovery point or a backup and convert that into a powered-off VM in Hyper-V or Vmware. We'll take a look at how all this works together and how we can run the backup and copy recovery point and other agent features through the console using plans. And we'll take a look at some of the reports that are available. Once we've gone through the concepts of these areas, we'll then jump into a live demo, and I'll show you how we can access each of these within the console. Taking a quick look at an overview of Arcserve UDP. Arcserve UDP, or Unified Data Protection, is our next generation data protection product. It brings together what previously were separate products in Arcserve Backup, Arcserve Replication, and High Availability, or RHA. And it brings what was formerly Arcserve D2D and brings it all together in a unified architecture with UDP. With Arcserve UDP, we can protect both physical and virtual machines. And we can manage it through a simple unified management console. A full UDP solution also will use a recovery point server. That's the teal box in the middle there. And we'll be looking at the recovery point server in our next webinar. But through the UDP solution, we can perform features like replication, virtual standby, which we'll look at later today, instant VM, high availability, and more. It's probably best to think of Arcserve UDP like an SLA dial, where we have good, better, and best. With a good solution, we can perform daily backups, whether they're to disk or to tape. We can then take those tapes off-site. We can do quarterly or half-yearly testing. If we want to turn that dial, we can make it a bit better by doing multiple daily incremental backups. We might do replication to a DR site, and we might do remote virtual standby for key systems. We can turn that dial further to the best, and with best we can enable multiple site replication. So if you have branch offices, they can all replicate back to a central site, and then that might replicate back to a DR site, for example. We can also enable full high availability for the mission-critical system. With high availability, we actually have a near real-time replication of the data, which means that if a key system or a critical system goes down, we can fail over to another system with minimal loss of data. And what's more, we can enable automated DR testing with high availability using our assured recovery feature. We can set a schedule to make this happen automatically. You might want to do a monthly or a weekly test. We have some customers doing daily DR testing. And at the end of that automated DR test, a report will be generated which will tell you whether it was successful or not. All of these features are available with the Arcserve UDP solution. Last time, we took a look at the Arcserve UDP agent and some of the features that are available. We looked at how we can enable backups, and that might be to a network drive or a local hard drive. We looked at how we can copy a recovery point. So we have our primary destination might be a NAS, for example, and then we can enable a copy of that recovery point to a hard drive or another network location. We looked at file copy, which lets us pick a directory or multiple directories, and based on filters, we can copy particular files to another location after the backup. That might be another network drive or a local drive, or that might be the cloud, like Amazon S3 or Microsoft Azure. And we also looked at file archive, which works in a similar feature, but instead of just copying the file, it will move it from the system to that secondary location, and it will leave a stub behind which tells us where that file is located now. So we're going to take a look at how we can do this and more with the Arcserve UDP Console. The first thing is when we add an Arcserve UDP Console, we need to be able to manage nodes. Now, node is the name we give to servers or workstations that we're looking to back up. These can be physical or virtual machines. We can add them manually. We can type in their host name or IP address. Or if we're looking at virtual machines, we can import them from Hyper-V or Vmware. We can also query Active Directory and import nodes from there. And then once the UDP console is managing these nodes, we can actually choose to deploy and push out the agents to these machines, meaning that we don't need to touch each node separately anymore. We can also perform Agentless Vm Backup when we use the UDP console. We can do this for VMs running on Hyper-V and VMware. And by doing Agentless Vm Backup, as its name suggests, we don't need to install agents on the VMs. We do the backup through the use of a backup proxy, which is a Windows server which is running the UDP agent. And when we do an Agentless VM backup, we're actually doing a backup of the entire VM at the VM level. However, we have the ability to do either a full VM restore, or we can do a granular file folder restore from the VM. I mentioned we can do this on Hyper-V and VMware, so let's take a look at how we can do that with these two hypervisors. With Agentless VM Backup for Hyper-V, we install the Arcserve UDP agent on the Hyper-V host itself. This way, the host is the backup proxy. This is efficient because when we present the snapshots to the proxy, being on the local machine, it doesn't have to go across the network. And then the agent that's on the proxy, in this case the host itself, performs the backup to the destination. So we'll be looking at the UDP console communicating with the proxy and the host, and then that performing the backup to the final backup destination. Because Hyper-V is essentially a Windows base, we can do this. However, with VMware, we must use a separate Windows machine, whether that's a VM or a physical server, because we are not able to install the Windows UDP agent on the ESX host itself. Now, we use VDDK to present the snapshot to the backup proxy, and we can use SAN, hot add, or network methods to move the data. So let's take a look at the different ways we can use the backup proxy with VMware. Let's start with the SAN transport method. In this method, we have an ESXi host or multiple ESXi hosts, and they'll be using a data store that is situated on a SAN. The UDP console will connect with the ESXi host. If you're using a vCenter server, we'll connect with the vCenter. We also have the backup proxy defined, and the backup proxy will have the Arcserve UDP agent installed. The backup proxy will access the SAN, and the data store, the VMware data store LUN, will be presented to the backup proxy, and then the agent on the backup proxy will perform the backup to the destination. This is the most network efficient way of doing the backup using VMware VMs, because the backup proxy is accessing the snapshot through a SAN and not going over the network. Looking at hot add, if we have an ESXi environment or a VMware environment where we're not using a SAN backend, but we still don't want to send snapshots over the network, what we can do is we can set up a Windows VM to be the backup proxy. Using hot add, we can then present the snapshots from the host to the VM, and then the VM will perform the backup to the destination. Now, if you have multiple ESXi hosts, you can have multiple proxies. You're not limited to having only one. And by doing hot add, again, we're not sending the snapshots over the network because we are locally presenting them to the VM proxy. Lastly, we have the network transport method. In this way, we have a separate backup proxy, and this can be a physical box, it can be a VM. Essentially, with the network transport method, what happens is the host will present the snapshots, the VMware host will present snapshots to the backup proxy over the network, and then the proxy will then send the backup to the backup destination. Now, when we set up our agentless backup, we can choose the order in which these methods are attempted. So we can always rely on network transport method to be a fallback in the event the other options are not available. And we'll take a look at how that's set up when we go through the live demo. A new feature available with the Arcserve UDP console is virtual standby. With virtual standby, as mentioned before, we can take a recovery point or a backup and create a powered off VM in VMware or Hyper-V. When we do this, the VM and the virtual disk is created on the hypervisor. So if it's Hyper-V, it'll be created in the directory where the VMs are designated. In VMware, it'll be created in the ESX data store. And the size of that disk will be the same as the source node. So if you're backing up 100 gig VM, then when you're creating a virtual standby, it'll use 100 gig of space as well. That said, the virtual standby VM can have multiple snapshots. So when you do your first conversion, that will be a full VM disk. And then afterwards, as you do incrementals, those incrementals can be applied as snapshots to the original VM disk. Now you can have up to 24 or 29 snapshots depending on whether you're using Hyper-V or VMware. And this is useful in environments or situations, I should say, where, for example, you might be hit by a crypto lock and you're not aware of it until maybe a few days after the event. So what will happen is you can apply and spin up the VM using an earlier snapshot. So what happens is our source node will perform a backup to the destination, and then from the destination, we'll create a VM on Hyper-V or VMware, and that's going to be powered off, ready to be turned on if and when we need it. Now, to do these UDP agent features like backup, copy recovery point, file copy, and to do the new feature like virtual standby or agentless VM backup, we use what we call plans. Plans are created in the UDP console, and plans consist of one or more tasks. The tasks are what we just mentioned, backup, file copy, and so on. When we create a plan, we assign nodes into that plan, and a node cannot belong to more than one plan at a time. So if you want to do a backup and then a copy recovery point and then a virtual standby, you can do all of that within the one plan, and you just set them up as tasks to be performed within the one plan. Each plan will have its own settings defined with its schedule settings or retention policy and the destination. If you need to have different retention policies or if you want to set up separate schedules, that's fine, and we can do that by creating separate plans. When we create and save a plan in the UDP console, the settings of that plan are then pushed out to the UDP agents on the nodes, and then the UDP agents will run those tasks when scheduled. If we're doing agentless VM backups, the settings are actually sent to the UDP agent on the backup proxy. So essentially, we'll go into a plan, define all our settings, choose our tasks, and then the UDP console will push that out, and then the backups will run. Again, we'll take a look at that in the demo. And then lastly, that leads us to reporting. Within the Arcserve UDP console, there are some reports that are available. We also have a dashboard which we'll look at. And we can also generate reports for all our nodes, or we can apply filters. So we can generate reports for a single node, a group of nodes, or all of them. Another feature is setting up a schedule so that a report can be sent out via email on a regular basis. So maybe you want to get a backup report and say, I want a daily backup report sent to my inbox at 8 a.m. every day. And we can set that up with the UDP console. When we send these reports out, we can also include not just the email content, but we can also have attachments. We can have a CSV file or a PDF or a HTML version or all of them, and they'll be coming with the report as attachments. So we've mentioned a lot about these different features and the different actions and options available in the console. Let's take a look at the UDP console itself. So the UDP console, like the Arcserve UDP agent, is accessed through a web browser. So I'll just open the console link. Now this is a UDP console that I've set up previously, and I've done some previous backups and some work with it just to get some data in. When you first log in, you see the dashboard screen. Now at the moment I'm not backing up any servers, so in the top left corner we can see that we have a pie chart here which is currently showing no backups. If we had servers that were being backed up, we'd have additional info. We'd see what servers backed up. If any servers didn't back up or if the backups failed, we'd see those information as well. On the top right, we see information of what data is being backed up. Now with this screen, we actually have two figures. We have a light blue and a darker blue color. This just shows the amount of data being backed up versus what's actually stored on disk. We'll take a look at what this means in more detail when we talk about the recovery point server in the next session. But just want to point out that you have, at a glance, a quick view of the last 7 days of how much data is being backed up versus how much disk space is being used. In the bottom half of the screen, we have additional info. So the top right shows if we were to run a full backup today, how much disk space would be needed versus how much data there is to backup. And in the bottom left here, it counts the amount of restorable data, taking into account all previous recovery points that are also saved on disk. And then lastly, in the bottom right, it shows us how much actual disk space has been used in our destination over the last 7 days. Now this is historical data. I have since cleared the console, so we're not going to see a lot of data in there right now. I just wanted to show you what some of the graphs can actually look like. Now within the UDP console, most of our configuration and setup is done in the Resources tab. So I'm going to click on Resources here, and when we do that, the screen that comes up is essentially split into 3 panes. In the left, we have a tree view, which gives us access to different areas in the console. We have the center pane, which shows us the information relevant to that branch. And then we have the right pane, which gives us some detail. We start with all nodes. All nodes will give you a list of all the servers that are being managed by this UDP console. The console name here is called MSP01. That's just the name I had for this particular machine. And when you install the Arcserve UDP console, by default it will add the UDP console itself to the list. Now if I want to add additional nodes, I can click on Add Nodes, and then I have a drop down at the top that lets me choose how I want to add and what kind of nodes I want to add. I can add Windows node. If I select this, I provide a host name or an IP address, and this will allow me to add a node manually. Typically, when you add a Windows node, you'll be performing an agent-based backup, but you can define a hypervisor if the machine you're adding is a VM later on. In this case, I have a server called Demo03, which is running the Arcserve UDP agent. And I want to now add that machine into the UDP console. So I'll put the host name in, I'll provide my administrator credentials, and then I have an option to put a description in. In this case, I'll leave that blank. And then if you're integrating and using the UDP Premium to do tape backups as well, we can collect information if you're running Arcserve backup. In this case, this is not, so I'm going to leave that blank. And I'm going to add this to the list. When I say add to list, what it's going to do is try to connect to that server with these credentials. And if successful, that node should appear on the right-hand side. And then we'll be able to add more nodes if we want. So we can see there, Demo03 is now in that list. Now if I don't want to add it manually, I have options of adding or discovering from Active Directory. If I do this, I need to define my domain controller, and then I can set up a schedule for it to poll and get information from Active Directory. Now I haven't done that, being an empty UDP console. But we can see here, if you would poll, we'd have a list of populated servers in Active Directory we can add from here. The other options we have available is importing from Hyper-V or VMware. So if we're looking at importing from VMware, first of all, we need to define either the vCenter or the actual ESX host or IP address. In my environment, I don't have a vCenter, I just have a single standalone ESX server. So I'll provide my credentials and we'll connect to the host. So when it connects, we can then expand the server and we can choose which VMs we want to add. Now you can see here, Demo03 is actually a VM that's running on there, but I'm choosing to use an agent-based backup, which is why I didn't import. I want to back up Ubuntu, and you can see I've actually created a VM called Udp Proxy. This is what I'll be using for my VM-based backup later on, so I'm not going to add that in right now. So I'm happy with Ubuntu. If you had another VM that you wanted to import, they'd be all listed there. If you have a lot of nodes, if you had a vCenter, for example, and you had multiple ESX hosts, you could start typing the name of a node to start to filter the list of VMs that are available to make it easier to see. You also have the option of putting in your administrator accounts for Windows VMs, and these will be used for running pre- or post-job scripts, log truncation for SQL or Exchange, and other tasks. So this is a Linux box because it's Ubuntu. I'll leave that as is. I can add that into the list. And we've added that in now, so we can see we've got Demo 03 and Ubuntu. I can then do a search and import from a Hyper-V server. So I'll put the Hyper-V host name in that I have. I can type correctly. And I'll put my credentials in, and we'll hit connect. So in a similar way, we can see the list of VMs underneath the Hyper-V host. So in this case, I might just back up that server. And here we can, again, similar to before, we'll provide our credentials. So we can do log truncation, pre-flight check, and pre-post-job scripts. So we've added those in. I'm happy with that list. And once I'm done, I can click Save. And those nodes will be added into this All Nodes list in the Udp console. Now, one thing you'll notice is all of these servers have an exclamation mark. If I hover my mouse over it, it tells me that the node is not protected by a plan. So basically, it's telling me you've added these servers into the list. These nodes are being managed by the console, but they're not being backed up. I can also click on a particular row, and on the far right, under this detail pane, I can expand the status, and it will tell me the same thing. If I don't want to hover my mouse, or if it disappears, I can click on the row, and it will give me the status on the right. So we've added our nodes in, but we've told it's not part of a plan. So let's go and actually create a plan now. So to create a plan, in the tree view we have plans, and if I click on all plans here, the middle pane will show me any plans that have been defined. In this case, this is empty, so we're going to go ahead and we'll click Add a Plan. We can then give this plan a new name. So I'm just going to call this Demo Plan. And you'll notice on the left it says Task 1 by default. And then we have a drop down and we can choose what kind of task this is going to be. So we have options to do an agent-based Windows backup, agent-based Linux backup, or an agentless backup for VMs. Let's go ahead and do a backup of the Demo 03 box. That's going to be an agent-based backup. So I choose agent-based Windows backup, and then I have the option here to add servers. I just want to point out that you don't have to add servers in immediately, meaning that when you install the console, you can create your plans beforehand. If you know what your retention and backup policy is going to be, you can create the plan. And then once you start adding servers, or if you're adding servers later, you can modify the plans and just add the servers in afterwards. In this case, I'm going to click on Add Nodes, and then I'm going to select Nodes to Protect. Because I've already added them into the console, I can click on Select Nodes. If they were not in the console yet, I can click on Add Windows Node to go straight to the previous Add wizard we saw before. So in this case, I'm going to select Nodes. Here I want to select Demo 03 as part of my backup. You'll notice that the plan column is empty. I can also do a backup of MSP or RAS01 because it's detected these as Windows nodes. And the Ubuntu VM is not selectable because it sees that as a non-Windows VM. In this case, I want to do agent-based backup of Demo 03. I tick it. I'll add it into the selected nodes on the right. And I can click OK when I'm happy. Before I do that, if I have a very long list of servers in this right-hand and the left-hand side, I might want to put a filter in by different groups. Or I can start typing a host name and it will filter based on what I type in. In this case, I don't need to. I've added Demo 03 and I'll click on OK. When you do an agent-based backup, you also have the option to do a backup of all of the volumes, or you can select particular volumes to backup. So if I choose particular volumes, I can choose to include, say, the C drive and the D drive. I might do the system reserve volume, and so on. It's important to note that any selections you make here will be applied to all of the servers in the list. If you want to customize the volumes that are backed up for different servers, you can do that. You'll need to create individual plans for those machines. In this case, Demo 03 is just a basic Windows server. I'm happy to back up all the volumes. It's not very big. We'll then choose the destination. You'll notice that in the console, we now have the option of choosing to back up either to a local disk or shared volume, just like we did with the agent, or we can use a recovery point server. Again, because we'll be looking at the recovery point server later on, we want to back up to our local disk or shared folder. Now, I've already been doing agent-based backups for Demo 03. If I log in to Demo 03, I can take a look at where my backups are being saved, and I can send my backups to the same location. So here we can see on the main status page, we can see that the path for our backup destination is this folder, NAS01 USB disk 2 UDP backup Demo 3. I'm going to copy this path, and I'll come back to my destination, and I'm not going to choose the folder because that folder will be created automatically based on the host name. So I'll put the path in, and I'll click on the arrow that's going to ask for our credentials. So I'll provide my credentials to access the share, and it's happy with that. If I click Browse, you can see that UDP backup folder actually has backups for 3 machines using agents. So I'm happy to keep that. It will automatically put Demo 03 into that folder. And then I can choose my encryption and compression. Again, in this case, I want to follow what I've been doing here. So if I want to check this, I can go to Settings. And then what you'll notice is my settings here are now grayed out. I don't have the option to change anything. I can't change the format, encryption, compression. And the reason for this is because we're now managing Demo 03 from the console, we remove the ability for users on the machine to make modifications. So by having a central management, we're also removing the possibility of local users making changes. In this case, we're going to use the default because we didn't change them, so no encryption and standard compression is what's being used. And then we'll go to the schedule. So what we're going to do is we're going to keep recovery points, but we're going to set up our schedule. Now here, I'll go back to the agent and we can see we're doing 5 manual or custom backups, 4 dailies, 2 weeklies, and 1 monthly. So I'm going to go back, I'm going to create a schedule similar to that. So I'm going to modify my daily. I only need to do Monday through Thursday, and I will keep dailies. I can now add another schedule, and that might be my weekly schedule. And then I'll add another backup schedule, this time a monthly schedule. And I'll make my retentions the same as before. And then you have options to create catalogs. So cataloging can be important if you're doing a lot of searches for particular files. It'll make that process faster. But in this case, I'll leave that unchecked. And then lastly, under the Advanced tab, we can choose whether we're going to do log truncation, hardware, software snapshots, pre or post job scripts. They can be entered here. And we can enable email alerts for this job. So if we tick the box, we can choose what alerts to get. And if we click on the email settings button, we can put our email server details in as well. So it's the same options that we've seen in the agent, but presented in the console. And then once we're happy with that, we'll hit save. And now you'll see here it says deployment in progress. So it's now pushing out the agent settings to the agent on the demo 03 box. Deployment is now successful. If I go back to all nodes, you'll see that in the plan column, demo 03 belongs to demo plan. Now, I still have an exclamation mark though. So let's click on the row and take a look at the status here on the right. It says the initial job is pending. So this hasn't done a backup yet. Now we can wait for the backup schedule to come around, which we set at 10 p.m. Or we can manually kick off a backup now. I can right-click on any server that belongs to a plan, and I can say backup now. I can click that. I'll say do an incremental backup. If I say to do an incremental backup and there are no previous backups, it will automatically convert to a full. You'll notice that we have a little spinning wheel next to demo 03. That means that a job or a task is running across for that machine. And we can click on jobs at the top here and take a look at what jobs are in progress. So we can see here we're doing a backup, and that's an incremental, and it's only needing to back up 71 meg. Not a lot of data has changed from the previous backup to this backup. So that's now going to complete, and then it's gone out of that list. If I go back to the resources screen, I now have a green tick next to demo 03 because I now have a successful backup. Now, if I want to create an agentless backup, I'll come back to plans, and I'll create another plan. So I'll click on Add Plans, and let's call this Agentless Demo. We'll now choose to do an host-based agentless. And now what we need to do, we have a similar screen, but we have a few extra settings and a few extra items. First of all, we need to set the backup proxy. So I'm going to click on Add, and I need to define which server is going to be my backup proxy server. Now, if I'm doing for Hyper-V, I can choose the Hyper-V host itself. If it's a VMware server, I'll need to define the name of either the VM or the physical box that I want to use as the proxy. Then I can add the nodes. So if I click Select Nodes again, I can choose whether I want to use Ubuntu or my RAS server. For Hyper-V, I don't want my snapshots to go over the network, so I'll leave it as RAS. And that's going to be a local VM. And then I've got options down here for VMware or Hyper-V snapshots. For VMware snapshots, we can choose whether we want to use VMware tools or if we want to use VSS inside the VM. And then for the transport method, if you recall, we could choose SAN, hot add, or network. We can let VMware decide, or if we click on this button, we can decide the order. So we have SAN, hot add, NBD, and NBD SSL. So the last two are network, one's using SSL and one isn't. So we can play with the order, or we can let VMware decide. If we're doing a Hyper-V agentless backup, we can choose whether we want to put the VMs into a saved state, or if we're going to be backing up with VSS. And we can choose whether we want to back up each VM individually with a separate snapshot, or if we want to use a single snapshot for all VMs. If you have a large number of VMs, it's best to back them up individually so that as the VMs finish their backups, the snapshots are released and they're not kept for an extremely long time. Once we've got our settings, we can go to destination. And just like before, we can choose a recovery point server, which we'll look at next time, or the shared folder. So I'll put my credentials in again. And I'm sending this to my NAS. No encryption, and I'll have standard compression. Schedule. We can then choose our schedule just like we had before. I'm going to leave this as default for the interest of time. And under advanced, we have options for hardware, software, log truncation, pre and post job scripts like before, and we have email alert options. Once I'm happy with these, I can click on Save. And it'll then push the settings out to the proxy machine. Let's say, for example, I want to do a virtual standby, or I want to do a copy of a recovery point. What I can do is I can do that as an additional task in a plan. I'm going to modify an existing plan. So I'm going to go to my demo plan. I'm going to click Modify. And then I'm going to click on Add a Task. So if I click on Add a Task here, I can then choose what kind of task I want to run. I've got options for replicate, virtual standby file copy, and so on, copy to tape. Some of these will require the use of a recovery point server or an RPS. And if you try to use it without one, it'll actually give you an error or a warning there saying you can't replicate without a recovery point server. In this case, we want to do a file copy. So I'll click on File Copy, and then I have the same options that I had in the agent. I can choose which recovery points I want to do a file copy from. I can then add my folders and my filters for the different files, and then I can choose the destination. So let's say, for example, that was going from a documents folder, for example. And then I want to copy all files from that folder. And then choose destination. I have options for cloud, network, or a drive. So if I say cloud storage, I'll define my cloud storage. So I might choose Amazon S3. I'll click on Add, and then I can provide the credentials for that particular cloud destination. Alternatively, if it's a network share, I can just put the path into the share. Let's say I want to do a virtual standby. So I can add a task again, and in the drop-down, I'll choose virtual standby. In this case, we're going to choose a source. So here we're going to do a virtual standby using the backup made of task 1. We're then going to choose the virtualization server. Where are we going to create the VM? Is it going to be on VMware, or is it going to be on Hyper-V? If it's on VMware, we need to provide either the vCenter or the ESX host itself. Provide the credentials. And then if we click on the ESX node, it'll go and connect to where we've said. If it's a vCenter and you have multiple ESX hosts, by clicking on the drop-down, you'll see that list. You've then got a monitor here. And we can use the monitor to keep an eye on what's happening, but at the same time, we can also use it as a proxy to get the data into the VMware server. So if you're doing VM backups, you can nominate your proxy machine if you like. So I have UDP Proxy 01, and then I'll provide my credentials, and then we'll go to the virtual machine. So it's not connecting to that monitor to see if it's online and it has the agent. And then once it connects to that machine, now in this case, UDP Proxy 01, it says it's managed by another console. I had that in another lab for testing, so I'm happy to take it away and then make it managed by our console here. So this is actually a good note as well. Each node can only be managed by one UDP console. So you can't have one console managing you can't have the same node being managed by multiple consoles. Once we're in the virtual machine setting here, we can then choose what prefix we want to have. If we're using resource pools, you can click on Browse Resource Pools and choose one. My standalone ESX host doesn't have any defined, so that's fine. And then here you can see how many snapshots you want to apply to the virtual standby VM. Let's say I'm doing daily backups, and I want to have a week's worth of backups or snapshots that I can restore from or start the VM from. I'll choose 7. And then I can increase my CPU count, my memory settings. I can choose which data store I want to use. So I've got a few different data stores here. In this case, I'm just going to use this 1 terabyte data store. And then you can choose the network adapter. Now if I want, it'll copy the same number of network adapters from my source machine, or if I untick this, I can add one or more and customize those network adapters. In this case, the adapter type can be set to E1000 or VMXstat and so on. I'm going to leave it as default. If you have multiple vSwitches, you can choose what network you want to attach the network adapter to. And then when I click on Advanced, I have options to automatically start the virtual machine. So if you recall, we nominated a monitor box. That's going to keep an eye on the VM and the source machine. If the source machine is detected to go down, if this is set to automatically start the VM, it'll power on that VM for us. If you want a little control over it, you can leave it as no, and then you can start that VM through the UDP console manually if you like. And then you've got the options for the heartbeat, how often you want to communicate and check that it's up. And lastly, you have the email alert box. So we can enable email alerts for this task. So again, we can customize what we want to see alerts on and click on email settings to put the server address in. Once we save this, it'll push the settings out to the proxy machine, and it'll push the settings out to our agent machine so that it's updated and is in sync. So the last thing I want to show today is some of the reporting. So I'll click on reports here, and there are some reports settings that are pre-populated here on the left. So here, in this case, as I said, there isn't a lot of data currently in my console, but I just did do a backup of demo 03. So that's showing 100% successful backups for one machine. If I click on the actual pie chart, it'll give me information about the particular node. If I did any VM backups, they'd be shown here. In this case, I haven't kicked the backup off yet for the VM. And the managed capacity report will show me how much disk space is being protected. So demo 03 is 23.25 gig. So that's what's being protected, and that's here listed in the underneath. Now, if you recall, I said we can have reports sent out to us automatically. If we click on the first arrows here on any of the reports, we actually have these 6 icons. We have a refresh icon. We've got a reset out icon, so we can reset our filters. What I want to click on here is this email or envelope icon. If I click on this, okay, first of all, I need to specify my email server settings. So I'll click OK. I can set my email settings through the Settings tab. So I'll quickly go to my email alerts. You can see you can choose Google, Yahoo, Live Mail, or so on. I'm going to choose my I think it requires see if that's going to work. There we go, successfully sent. So I'll save my email settings. I'll come back to reports. So I can click on this envelope tab now, or button, and now I can create a new schedule. So this might be daily backup status report. Give it a more meaningful description, but I'm happy with that. We can click on email. We can choose who we want to send this to, what the priority is, contents. We can also choose to attach particular PDF, HTML, CSV, and so on. I then choose which reports I want to receive. So I want to do node backup and VM backup. And then I can choose, if I want to filter it, I can filter it based on which nodes I want to do. I can choose for all of them or one particular machine. If I want to, I can create groups. So if I have multiple SQL servers, I can put all of those into a group and get a SQL backup report, and so on. So I can put particular filters in, and then I can say, I'm doing a daily backup report, so I only want the last 1 day's report. And then I want a pie chart with it. And then schedule, I want it every day at 8 a.m., for example. And then I can say OK, and then it'll run. As an example of what a report might look like, if I log into my mail, I've actually received, set up reports on a different account. So here is an example of a report that might come through. And this is just a machine, another lab setup I have that has additional servers. So it has a table that shows you the name of the host, when the backup was run, whether it was encrypted or whether it was successful, the backup, and so on. You can see here I've got a backup that was cancelled and so on. I've also got the attachments, so I can open the CSV here. So I can save it and I can open it in Excel. A zip file here contains the HTML file, and I have a PDF as well. Each of these will have the same information there, and we've also got the pie chart down here, so it'll show us the backup status. So this is back in the UDP console. So you're not relying on email alerts solely. You can just get a condensed and a consolidated single status report that tells you whether things have been successful or not. That pretty much covers today's session on the Arcserve UDP console. As I said, this is the second of a three-part series, and I invite you and encourage you to join us for the next webinar where we'll introduce and look at the Arcserve Recovery Point Server, or the RPS. By adding the RPS, we can perform additional enhancements to our data protection capabilities. We can enable global source-side deduplication, greatly enhancing the amount of disk space saved, but also reducing the network bandwidth required. By using a recovery point server, we can also replicate data, and when we couple that with the source-side deduplication, we can enable replication of data across sites over the internet in a very bandwidth-efficient way. We also have additional features such as instant VM. We can also do copy to tape and a lot more. So this next session is in 2 weeks' time, and you can use the same link just to register. You just need to nominate the appropriate webinar date on that page. Also, we have upcoming partner technical training sessions, and these are going to be held quarterly in Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, and Auckland. We have these coming up over the next month or two, and we're starting with the Arcserve UDP Boot Camp 101. This is a one-day technical session that goes through the UDP solution and goes through in a bit more detail all the different features and functions that we can do with the Agent Console and RPS. This is a partner session, but if you are interested, if you're a customer and you're interested in having or attending a boot camp session, please contact us, and we can see if we can set something up based on the interest that we get. That said, if you're interested in any other detail, if you want a deep dive or another demo, or if you're interested in the training, please feel free to contact myself or my colleague Andrew Huntley. Our details are on screen. So our email address and phone number are there. Please feel free to reach out to us. With that, we've got a few minutes. I'll open that up to any questions. So I'll see if any questions have been raised, so bear with me. Okay, so we've got a few questions that have come up. So we've got a question about Arcserve updates and how they work. So what we've been looking at is Arcserve UDP 6. This was released a couple of months ago now, and apart from major version releases, we also have periodic updates to the product. And Arcserve UDP version 6, update 1, has actually just come out over the last day or so. So if you already have version 6 installed, depending on how you've set your check for update schedule, you might get a notification over the next week saying update 1's available. Another question there about support for Linux and SUSE 12 specifically. What we can see is with Arcserve UDP, we'll be supporting SUSE 12 with the update 1 release. So it actually ties in together very well there. There's a question there about if there's any specific information on the benefits or enhancements of UDP 6 over UDP 5. Definitely there is. A few weeks back, actually about a month or so back, we actually had a UDP 6 new feature webinar. Happy to send you details on that, and we can go through those benefits and features there. There's another question here about the pushing of agents out, and if the remote node that's being updated with the agent needing a reboot. So what happens is when an agent is pushed out, with UDP version 6, installing the agent does not require a reboot. Now, if you're going from version 5 to version 6, under some circumstances, the uninstallation of the UDP version 5 agent may require a reboot, but installation of the UDP version 6 agent does not. If you already have the current UDP agent on a node, and if you then right-click on a node and say deploy the agent, it will check to see if it's the current version. If it's the current version, it will not reinstall the agent. It'll just detect that the agent's running and update accordingly. If you are running version 5, please get in touch with us. And if you're under maintenance, there is a free of charge upgrade to get to the latest version, and that's part of the benefits of being under maintenance. So if you get in touch with us, we can provide you the details on how to get that. We've got maybe another couple of minutes left if anyone has any other questions. I'm just going through the list, so I'll see if I've missed anything. So there's a question here. So if I start with just using the Arcserve UDP agent, can I then add the console and then add an RPS? And the answer is yes. So last time we looked at just the agent installation and how we can perform backups and file copy and so on with just the agent. Today we looked at how we can add a machine that was using an agent and bring it under the console, and by doing that, getting central management, the ability to do agentless VM backups as well. Next time when we add the RPS, we'll actually take a look at how we can add the recovery point server, the RPS, and we can actually import the existing UDP backups from our NAS or from our hard drive into the RPS. So by doing that, we can actually eliminate the need to do full backups again. So there's a lot of benefit to using a recovery point server, and it's actually a very exciting piece of the Arcserve UDP solution. But the short answer is yes, you can start with an agent today. When you grow, add a console. If you grow some more or you want to be able to replicate, you can add the recovery point server, definitely. Okay. So if there are no other questions, I'd like to thank you for your attendance today. As I said, if you're after any other information, technical details, if you're interested in the boot camp or want to sign up, or if you're having any issues trying to register for the upcoming webinar, please let us know, and we'll be happy to provide you with more information and help you out there. But until next time, Thank you again, and hope to see you for webinar 3 of the Arcserve UDP Basics series. Thank you.